Victoria Harlow's hands trembled as the janitor placed her family's long-lost locket in her palm, the only photographs of her dead parents and sister suddenly restored after 20 years of emptiness. As the silver warmed against her skin, the billionaire CEO who had built an empire on ice-cold logic felt her carefully constructed world collapse around her. Before we continue, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment where in the world you're watching from. Let's go. Victoria Harlow's heels clicked against the polished marble floor of Harlow Tower, the sound echoing through the cavernous lobby like a metronome, counting down the seconds of her carefully scheduled day. Employees scattered from her path, their eyes downcast, their good mornings fading into nervous whispers as she passed. At 45, Victoria had cultivated her reputation as the Ice Queen of Wall Street with the same precision she applied to acquisitions and mergers, her sleek grey suit armor against a world she'd learned to conquer but never trust. The Donovan deal is set for 9, her assistant, Marcus, recited as he matched her stride. Legal needs signatures on the Shanghai contract by 10. The board meets at 11, and cancel everything after 2, Victoria interrupted, her eyes never leaving her phone as she scrolled through emails. I have a personal matter to attend to, Marcus faltered mid-step, nearly colliding with the security guard. In 7 years, Victoria Harlow had never, not once, prioritized a personal matter over business. "Spoon everything?" he asked, unable to mask his shock. "Did I stutter?" Victoria finally looked up, one perfectly arched eyebrow raised. "No, Ms. Harlow, of course not." Marcus tapped frantically on his tablet. "Consider it done." The elevator doors opened at her approach, as if the building itself bent to her will. As they rode to the penthouse offices in silence, Victoria's mind drifted to the email that had arrived at precisely 4:17 that morning. An email that had jolted her awake from a fitful sleep, her heart pounding with a rhythm she hadn't felt in 20 years. "I found it." 3 simple words from an address she didn't recognize. No greeting, no signature, just those 3 words and an attachment containing an employee ID for Harlow Industries, a maintenance worker. Level B security clearance. The face in the photo was unremarkable. Mid-40s, weathered skin, eyes that had seen too much and expected too little from life. Thomas Reeve, a name she'd never heard before today. Yet somehow, he claimed to have found what she'd spent a fortune and 2 decades searching for. "Your 9 o'clock is waiting in the main conference room," Marcus announced as the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor. Victoria nodded, striding through the glass doors of her empire. Harlow Industries occupied the top 10 floors of the 70-story tower bearing her name, but the executive level was her sanctuary, minimalist, monochromatic, with floor-to-ceiling windows showcasing the city she'd conquered. "Tell maintenance I want to see Thomas Reeves in my office at 2:30 sharp," she said, handing Marcus her coat and bag. No background on why, just have him there. Marcus's eyes widened slightly, but he knew better than to question her. "Yes, Miss Harlow." The morning passed in a blur of meetings and contracts, acquisitions and projections. Victoria moved through them with mechanical precision, her mind elsewhere, replaying fragments of memory she'd spent years trying to forget. The weight of the silver locket against her collarbone, the delicate click of its clasp, the faces inside. The night it disappeared, taking the last piece of her heart with it. At exactly 2:29 p.m., Marcus's voice came through the intercom. "Ms. Harlow, there's a Thomas Reeves here to see you." Victoria took a steadying breath. "Send him in." The man who entered her office wasn't what she expected. His uniform was clean but worn, his hands calloused from years of manual labor. He stood just inside the doorway, a mixture of awe and discomfort on his face as he took in the sleek furniture, the original artwork, the panoramic view of the city. His eyes finally settled on her, and there was something in them, not the usual deference or intimidation she inspired, but a quiet certainty. "Ms. Harlow," he said, his voice deep and steady. "Thank you for seeing me." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Mr. Reeves, I understand you have something that belongs to me." He nodded, lowering himself into the chair with careful movements. "I've worked in this building for 8 months. he began. Night shift, mostly the lower levels, storage, archives. Victoria's patience, never her strongest virtue, began to thin. And 3 weeks ago, they had me cleaning out some old executive storage on level 40. Boxes from the original building demolition, stuff they moved over but never unpacked. He reached into his pocket, and Victoria felt her heart skip. I found this behind a broken panel, he continued. It had fallen into the wall cavity. Must have been there for years. He extended his hand, and Victoria saw it. A gleam of silver, catching the afternoon sunlight. A locket, her locket. The one she'd searched for, offered rewards for, hired private investigators to find. The one containing the only photos she had of them. How did you know it was mine? She asked, her voice betraying none of the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. I didn't. At first, Thomas placed the locket on the desk between them, but there's an inscription inside. And I remembered an article years back about you offering a reward for a lost family heirloom, a silver locket. Victoria stared at the tarnished silver oval, unable to reach for it. And you're here for the reward. Thomas shook his head slowly. No, ma'am. I'm here because that locket matters to someone. Things like that should find their way home. The reward stands, Victoria said, finally extending her hand. $1 million. Thomas's eyes widened briefly, but he shook his head again. I don't want your money, Ms. Harlow. Victoria's hand froze mid-reach. In her experience, everyone had a price. Everyone wanted something. Then what do you want? A chance, he said simply. My daughter, Sophie, she's brilliant. Engineering scholarship to MIT, but it only covers tuition. I can't manage the rest on my salary. Understanding dawned. You want a job for your daughter, an internship, he corrected. A fair shot, that's all. If she's not good enough, so be it, but she deserves a chance. Victoria studied him, this man who held a piece of her past in his weathered hands, asking not for himself, but for his child. Mr. Reeves, bring your daughter's resume to HR tomorrow. If she's as brilliant as you say, Harlow Industries would be fortunate to have her. Relief washed over his face. Thank you. Victoria nodded, then reached for the locket. As her fingers closed around the cool silver, 20 years collapsed like a house of cards. The inscription inside, always with you, always. She stood abruptly. Mr. Reeves, clear your schedule for the remainder of the day. There's something I need to show you. Thomas looked confused but nodded. Of course. Marcus, Victoria called through the intercom. Have my car brought around and cancel my remaining appointments. 20 minutes later, they were seated in the back of Victoria's Mercedes, the privacy partition up, the city flowing past the tinted windows. Thomas sat uncomfortably in his uniform, out of place in the luxury vehicle. 20 years ago, Victoria began, the locket now hanging around her neck where it belonged. I was a different person, not Victoria Harlow, billionaire CEO, just Victoria Pierce, a girl from Queens with ambition and a scholarship. Thomas remained silent, sensing the weight of her words. I had a family then, parents who worked themselves to exhaustion to give me opportunities, a younger sister who thought I hung the moon. Victoria's fingers wrapped around the locket. They died in a house fire while I was at college. This locket, it was the only thing I had left of them. I'm sorry, Thomas said quietly. I wore it every day for 5 years, until the night I lost it. Victoria's eyes met his, the night they broke ground on this tower. My first major project, and now it's found its way back to you, Thomas observed. Victoria nodded, her composure finally beginning to crack. Mr. Reeves, do you believe in signs? Before he could answer, the car pulled to a stop. Victoria led him through a wrought iron gate into a small, immaculately maintained cemetery on the outskirts of Queens. They walked in silence until she stopped before a simple headstone with 3 names: James Pierce, Evelyn Pierce, and Lily Pierce. I come here every week, Victoria said softly. For 20 years, I've come without their faces, with only memories that fade a little more each year. Her voice caught. Odin's until today. She opened the locket, revealing the tiny photographs inside, a smiling couple on one side, a young girl with Victoria's eyes on the other. With trembling fingers, she held it out to Thomas. You didn't just find a piece of jewelry, Mr. Reeves, she whispered. You found the last piece of my heart. Thomas stood motionless before the grave markers, witnessing something few had ever seen. Victoria Harlow vulnerable. Her composure, legendary in boardrooms and feared in negotiation rooms, was crumbling. The woman who commanded a corporate empire with ruthless efficiency now trembled before 3 simple headstones, her fingers tracing the inscription on the locket as if it were a talisman. "I built everything for them," Victoria whispered, more to herself than to Thomas. "Every acquisition, every merger, every building that bears my name. It was all to prove they didn't die for nothing." She looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "Does that sound foolish to you, Mr. Reeves?" "No," Thomas replied softly. "It sounds like love." A single tear escaped, tracing a path down Victoria's cheek. She brushed it away quickly, embarrassed by this display of emotion before a stranger. But Thomas wasn't looking at her with pity or judgment, only quiet understanding. "My wife died 6 years ago," he offered, his voice low and steady. "Cancer. Sophie was 12. Sometimes I still set 2 coffee cups out in the morning." Victoria nodded, grateful for this exchange that required no platitudes, no awkward sympathies, just the simple recognition of shared loss. "What was your sister like?" Thomas asked, gesturing to the youngest name on the headstone. A small smile touched Victoria's lips. "Lily was incandescent, always laughing, always dreaming. She wanted to be an artist." Victoria's fingers brushed the cold marble. "She would have been 35 this year." They stood in silence as the afternoon sun began its descent, painting the cemetery in amber light. Finally, Victoria straightened her shoulders, armor sliding back into place. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," she said, her voice regaining its professional edge, "for returning more than just a piece of jewelry." "Thomas," he corrected gently. "After all this, I think we can dispense with formalities." Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "Victoria," she offered in return. The drive back to the city was quiet, both lost in their own thoughts. As the car pulled up to the entrance of Harlow Tower, Victoria made a decision. "I'd like to meet your daughter," she said abruptly. "Not through HR, properly." Thomas looked surprised. "She has class until 6. "But dinner?" Victoria interrupted. "Tonight, 8 o'clock, at my penthouse." She handed him a business card with an address scribbled on the back. "Bring Sophie." Before Thomas could respond, Victoria was out of the car, striding toward the tower entrance, leaving him holding her card and wondering how a simple act of kindness had led to dinner with one of the most powerful women in the country. Sophie Reeves stared at her father in disbelief, her fork suspended halfway to her mouth. "You did what?" Thomas pushed his meatloaf around his plate nervously. "I returned Miss Harlow's locket, and now we're having dinner at her penthouse tonight." Sophie set down her fork with exaggerated care. At 19, she had her mother's delicate features and her father's determination. Currently, both were arranged in an expression of absolute shock. "Let me get this straight," she said slowly. "You found a billionaire's lost locket, returned it instead of claiming the reward everyone knows she offered, and now we're having dinner with her. The Victoria Harlow, the woman whose company I've dreamed of working for since I was 14. That about covers it." Thomas nodded, relieved his daughter wasn't angry. "She also mentioned something about an internship for you." Sophie nearly choked on her water. "An internship at Harlow Industries? Dad, that's impossible. People spend years trying to get their foot in that door." Thomas smiled. "Apparently not, if their father finds a priceless family heirloom behind a broken wall panel." 2 hours later, they stood before the private elevator that led to Victoria's penthouse. Sophie had changed 3 times before settling on a simple navy dress that showcased her intelligence rather than trying too hard to impress. Thomas wore his only suit, purchased for his wife's funeral and barely worn since. "You're sure about this?" Sophie whispered as the elevator ascended. "You're sure we're not being punked?" Thomas squeezed his daughter's hand. "I'm sure." The elevator opened directly into Victoria's penthouse, a vast space of clean lines and subtle luxury. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city below, lights twinkling like earthbound stars. Victoria stood by the windows, still in her business attire, the silver locket now prominently displayed against her grey suit. "Mr. Reeves," she greeted, stepping forward. "And this must be Sophie." "Ms. Harlow," Sophie managed, her usual confidence momentarily faltering. "Thank you for inviting us." Victoria's eyes assessed the young woman with frank interest. "Engineering at MIT. Impressive. What's your specialty? Sustainable energy systems, Sophie replied, regaining her footing. My thesis project focuses on improving battery storage efficiency for solar applications. Interesting, Victoria nodded. We have a division working on similar technology. The Chandler Initiative, Sophie said immediately. I've read all the public research papers. Your approach to integrating graphene composites is revolutionary, though I think the cooling system could be more efficient if... She stopped, blushing. Sorry, I tend to get carried away. Victoria's lips curved into a rare, genuine smile. Never apologize for passion, Miss Reeves. It's the engine of innovation. She gestured toward the dining room. Shall we? Dinner was served by a private chef who disappeared after placing each immaculately presented course on the table. The conversation flowed more easily than any of them expected, moving from Sophie's studies to Thomas's unexpected career path. I was in construction for 20 years, he explained, more relaxed now after excellent food and a glass of wine. The economy tanked, my company went under, and suddenly I was starting over at 43. Maintenance work was steady, with benefits for Sophie. Victoria nodded, understanding the sacrifice of pride for practicality. And what would you do if you could choose anything? Thomas looked surprised by the question. I'd build again, he admitted. Not houses, but restoration. Historic buildings, craftsmanship that's becoming a lost art. Victoria filed this information away, turning her attention back to Sophie. Tell me about this scholarship. What does it cover? What doesn't it? As Sophie detailed the financial tightrope she walked, tuition covered but not housing, books and/or living expenses, Victoria listened with growing interest. Here was a young woman of extraordinary potential, limited only by financial constraints. The same constraints that had nearly derailed Victoria's own ambitions 2 decades ago. I have a proposition for both of you, Victoria said as dessert was served. Sophie, Harlow Industries offers 10 elite internship positions each summer. They're highly competitive. Over 2,000 applications for each spot. I'd like you to apply. Sophie's eyes widened. Thank you. But Victoria held up a hand. I'm not offering you the position. I'm offering you the chance to earn it. Submit your application like everyone else. If you're as brilliant as I suspect, you'll succeed on merit. Sophie nodded, understanding the gift being offered wasn't favoritism, but opportunity. And Thomas, Victoria continued, turning to the father. Harlow Industries is launching a new division focused on historic building restoration. We need a project manager with practical experience and an eye for detail. Thomas stared at her. Are you offering me a job? I'm offering you an interview, Victoria corrected. The job, like your daughter's internship, will be earned on merit. Later, as Victoria walked them to the elevator, Sophie stepped ahead to call the car, leaving Thomas and Victoria momentarily alone. Why are you doing this? Thomas asked quietly. You don't know us. Victoria touched the locket at her throat. 20 years ago, I was a scholarship student with no family and no connection. Someone took a chance on me. Her eyes met his, surprisingly gentle. Consider this, paying it forward. The elevator arrived, and Sophie stepped in. Thomas followed, then turned back to Victoria. Thank you, he said simply. Victoria nodded. As the doors began to close, she spoke again, her voice softer than he'd heard it all day. The locket wasn't just jewelry, Thomas. It was the last time I allowed myself to feel anything. You didn't just return my past. You reminded me I still have a future. The doors closed on her words, leaving Thomas wondering if he'd imagined the vulnerability in her eyes. The board of directors meeting erupted into chaos the moment Victoria announced her plans for the new historic restoration division. This is completely outside our core business model, argued Lawrence Bennett, the eldest board member, his jowls quivering with indignation. Harlow Industries specializes in cutting-edge technology and modern infrastructure. Suddenly, you want us to start fixing up old building? Victoria remained perfectly still at the head of the table, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. 2 weeks had passed since the night she'd invited Thomas and Sophie Reeves into her home, and in that time, a plan had crystallized, one that made perfect business sense to her, regardless of its personal origins. If you'd bothered to read the full proposal, Lawrence, she replied, her voice arctic. "You'd see that the restoration division aligns perfectly with our sustainability initiatives. Repurposing historic structures reduces carbon footprint by 60% compared to new construction. It positions us favorably for government contracts and improves our ESG score. And the fact that you've already selected a candidate to interview for project manager, Rebecca Winters, the CFO, asked with narrowed eyes. A maintenance worker with no management experience. Victoria felt heat rise to her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral. Mr. Reeves has 20 years of construction experience and specialized knowledge in historical craftsmanship. His resume speaks for itself. His resume isn't what concerns me, Rebecca pressed. It's your sudden interest in him. The word is, you had dinner with him and his daughter at your penthouse. The room fell silent. Victoria's private life was famously off-limits. And my personal affairs are not board business, Victoria stated, each word precise as a scalpel. However, since you've chosen to make them so, yes, I invited Mr. Reeves and his daughter to dinner after he returned a family heirloom of significant sentimental value, a courtesy, nothing more. Rebecca exchanged glances with Lawrence. Victoria, we're concerned. The vote, Victoria interrupted, is whether to approve the restoration division, not whether to approve my dinner guests. All in favor. 7 hands raised immediately. Allies she'd cultivated over years. Rebecca and Lawrence remained opposed, but the motion carried. Victoria adjourned the meeting with brutal efficiency, gathering her materials and sweeping from the room before further objections could be raised. Marcus intercepted her in the hallway. HR called. Thomas Reeves is here for his interview. Victoria checked her watch. He's 15 minutes early. Punctuality as a character flaw. That's a new one, Marcus quipped. The corner of Victoria's mouth twitched. Have Johnson conduct the initial interview. I'll join for the final portion. Maintaining plausible deniability of favoritism? Marcus asked, his tone lighter than his words. Victoria shot him a look that would have withered a lesser man. Maintaining proper protocol, as everyone seems so eager to remind me. In the interview room 3 floors below, Thomas sat with his hands folded on the table, facing a stern-looking man in an impeccable suit. The questions had been rapid fire for 20 minutes. Technical specifications, management scenarios, budget projections. Thomas answered each one thoughtfully, drawing on decades of practical experience. Your resume shows a gap between Milestone Construction's bankruptcy and your maintenance position at Harlow Tower, Johnson noted, peering over his glasses. How did you support yourself during that time? Thomas hesitated. I took whatever work I could find, mostly day labor, construction sites, moving companies, landscaping. Johnson made a note. And how did you come to work at Harlow Industries specifically? They were hiring. The pay was steady. Benefits were good. Thomas leaned forward slightly. Mr. Johnson, I get the impression you're trying to find reasons why I'm not qualified for this position. Let me save you some time. I don't have an MBA. I don't have corporate experience. What I do have is 20 years of solving problems that exist in the real world, not on paper. Johnson's pen paused mid-note. Interesting perspective. If you want someone who can navigate building codes in their sleep, identify structural issues before they become catastrophic, and recognize craftsmanship worth preserving, I'm your man, Thomas continued, surprising himself with his boldness. If you want someone who looks good in organizational charts, I'm probably not. The door opened, and Victoria Harlow entered the room. Both men stood immediately. Mr. Johnson, I'll take it from here, she said. After Johnson departed, Victoria settled into the chair across from Thomas. Today, she wore a charcoal suit, the silver locket still at her throat. Thomas noticed she touched it absently, perhaps for reassurance. How's it going? She asked, her tone surprisingly informal. Honestly, I think I just talked myself out of a job, Thomas admitted. Victoria's eyebrow arched. How so? I may have suggested that corporate credentials aren't as valuable as practical experience. A genuine smile touched Victoria's lips. To the head of HR, bold strategy, Thomas shrugged. I figured honesty was better than pretending to be something I'm not. Victoria studied him, her expression unreadable. Walk with me, Mr. Reeves. She led him to the elevator, then up to the 65th floor, currently empty, just bare concrete and steel beam. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered spectacular views of the city. though the space itself was raw and unfinished. "What do you see?" Victoria asked, gesturing to the expanse before them. Thomas took his time, examining the bones of the space. "Good structural integrity. The support columns are overbuilt. You could remove every third one and still meet code. The ceiling height gives you options." He walked to the windows, checking the seals. "These need to be reseated. There's potential water infiltration points." Victoria nodded, clearly pleased. "And what would you do with this space?" Thomas considered the question carefully. "That depends on its purpose. What's it meant to be?" "That's the question, isn't it?" Victoria moved to stand beside him at the window. "The board wants another tech incubator space. Sterile, efficient." She turned to face him. "I was thinking of something different. The headquarters for the Restoration Division, a showcase of old-world craftsmanship married to modern function." Thomas's eyes lit up. "And you could expose these structural elements, incorporate salvage materials from historic buildings." His hands moved as he spoke, sketching invisible designs in the air. Reclaimed timber, restored masonry, handcrafted fixtures, a testament to preservation rather than constant replacement. Victoria watched him, something warming in her typically cold gaze. That's exactly what I was thinking." For a moment, they stood in companionable silence, looking out over the city, a landscape Victoria had helped shape with steel and glass monuments to progress. Thomas saw something else in her expression now, a yearning for connection, for meaning beyond the next acquisition. "The job is yours if you want it," she said finally. "The division launches next month. You'd have autonomy over projects, staffing, budget, within reason." Thomas turned to her, surprised. "Just like that. What about HR?" "The interview process. I make the final decisions at Harlow Industries," Victoria stated simply. "Always have." "And the board? I imagine they had questions about your sudden interest in historical restoration. And in me." Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "The board's concerns are irrelevant. I built this company. I call the shots." Thomas studied her face, seeing the fortress walls go up. "Thank you for the opportunity," he said carefully. "But I want to earn this position, not be given it because..." "Because what?" Victoria interrupted, her tone sharpening. "Because you feel some obligation after I returned the locket." Victoria's eyes flashed. "I don't do charity, Mr. Reed. If I'm offering you this position, it's because I believe you're qualified. Then let me finish the proper interview process." Thomas countered gently. "Let me earn it, for both our sakes." Victoria stared at him, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged. Finally, she gave a curt nod. "As you wish. 3 more interviews, technical, managerial, and financial. If you pass them all, the job is yours." "Thank you," Thomas said sincerely. As they rode the elevator back down, Victoria's phone chimed. She checked the message, and her expression darkened. "Is everything all right?" Thomas asked. "Fine," she replied curtly. "HR will contact you about the next interviews. Good day, Mr. Reeves." The abrupt dismissal left Thomas puzzled as he watched her stride away, already engrossed in whatever crisis demanded her attention. As he headed for the exit, Marcus caught up with him. "Mr. Reeves," he called. A moment, Thomas paused. "Yes?" Marcus glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "Sophie's internship application. It's been flagged by the committee." "Flagged? What does that mean?" "It means someone's questioning whether she earned her spot on merit or because of connections." Marcus looked uncomfortable. "Just thought you should know. The final selections are announced Friday." As Thomas left the building, the weight of Marcus's words settled on his shoulders. He'd wanted opportunity for his daughter, not controversy. And despite Victoria's icy professional demeanor, he'd glimpsed something beneath, a woman beginning to thaw after decades frozen in grief. Now he wondered if his presence in her life was causing more harm than good. His phone buzzed with a text from Sophie. "How did the interview go? Tell me everything." Thomas stared at the message, unsure how to respond. How could he tell his daughter that her dream internship might be jeopardized because of him, or that the formidable Victoria Harlow might be facing boardroom battles because she'd shown kindness to a maintenance worker? He typed simply, "Still in process. Let's talk tonight." Sophie sat cross-legged on their small apartment's worn couch, her laptop balanced precariously on a stack of engineering textbooks. Pages of calculations and diagrams surrounded her like academic confetti. When Thomas entered, She looked up with eager eyes. "So, did you wow them? Did you meet with Victoria Harlow again? Is she as intimidating in business mode as everyone says?" Thomas set down his keys, trying to organize his thoughts. How much should he tell his daughter? That her internship might be jeopardized by their connection to Victoria? That the board was questioning Victoria's judgment because of them? The interview process is continuing, he said carefully. Ms. Harlow joined for part of it. Sophie's eyes widened. "The CEO herself sat in on your interview, Dad. That's huge." "It's complicated, Sophie." Thomas sank into the armchair across from her. "There's politics involved that I didn't anticipate." Sophie's expression sobered. "Because of me, the internship. Not just that, the entire restoration division is new. Some board members think it's outside their business model. But it's brilliant," Sophie exclaimed. "Historical restoration combined with sustainable technology integration is the future of urban development. It's exactly the kind of forward-thinking approach that made Harlow Industries a leader in the first place." Thomas smiled despite his concerns. His daughter's passion was a force of nature. "Miss Harlow seems to share your enthusiasm," he admitted. "She showed me the floor they're planning to convert for the division headquarters." Sophie closed her laptop, giving him her full attention. "You didn't tell me that part. What's it like?" As Thomas described the vast empty space and Victoria's vision for it, his own excitement resurfaced. For years, he'd worked jobs that paid the bills, but left his creativity starved. The prospect of building something meaningful again, something that honored craftsmanship and history, stirred something in him he'd thought long dormant. "Dad," Sophie said softly when he finished, "you have to get this job. I haven't heard you talk like this since before Mom died." The observation caught him off guard. Had he been merely existing these past 6 years? Taking any job that would keep Sophie fed, housed and educated, but never allowing himself to want more. "I need to earn it properly," he said firmly. "No shortcuts because Ms. Harlow feels grateful about the locket." Sophie studied him, her expression thoughtful. "Is that all it is? Gratitude?" Thomas blinked. "What do you mean? I saw how she looked at you at dinner that night, and how you looked at her." "Sophie, that's—" Thomas sputtered, feeling heat rise to his face. "Ms. Harlow is my potential employer, that's all." Sophie shrugged. "If you say so. Just saying. There was definitely a vibe." "Shouldn't you be finishing that application?" Thomas deflected, gesturing to her laptop. "Already submitted." Sophie grinned. "And changing the subject won't make me forget this conversation." Thomas shook his head, but couldn't help smiling. His daughter knew him too well. Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria stood in her penthouse, staring at the locket in her palm. She'd removed it for the first time since Thomas had returned it, studying the delicate silver oval as if it might offer answers to questions she hadn't even formulated yet. Her phone rang. Rebecca Winters, her CFO. Victoria considered ignoring it, but practicality won out. "Rebecca," she answered coolly. "The board called an emergency session," Rebecca said without preamble. "Tomorrow morning, they're questioning the decision to fast-track Thomas Reeves through the hiring process." Victoria's fingers closed around the locket. "I wasn't aware I needed board approval for mid-level management hires." "You don't. But Lawrence is making noise about conflicts of interest and special treatment." "Victoria." Rebecca hesitated. "Are you sure you know what you're doing with this man?" "I'm creating a promising new division with qualified leadership." "That's not what I'm asking, and you know it." Victoria's jaw tightened. "My personal life is not board business. It becomes board business when it affects company decisions," Rebecca countered. "And I've known you for 15 years. I've never seen you create an entire division because someone returned a lost item. The restoration division makes financial and strategic sense," Victoria insisted. "The fact that Mr. Reeves happens to be qualified for a position within it is coincidental, is it?" Rebecca asked softly. "Victoria, no one would blame you for finding a connection after all these years alone. But the board—" "I'll see you tomorrow morning, Rebecca," Victoria interrupted, her voice glacial. "Good night." She ended the call, set down her phone, and continued staring at the locket. Inside were the faces she'd lost, her foundation, her motivation, her excuse for keeping the world at arm's length for 2 decades. Was Rebecca right? Was she manufacturing reasons to keep Thomas Reeves in her orbit? The thought was disturbing enough that Victoria immediately dismissed it as ridiculous. She was Victoria Harlow. She didn't need or want personal connections. They were messy, unpredictable, painful. Business was clean. Profit and loss, success and failure, measurable metrics without the complications of emotion. And yet, the memory of Thomas's face as he'd envisioned the restoration of the 65th floor, the genuine passion, the expertise born of years of hands-on experience rather than theory, had stirred something in her, something she'd buried alongside her family 20 years ago. Victoria snapped the locket closed and returned it to her neck where it belonged. Tomorrow, she would face the board and remind them exactly who built Harlow Industries from nothing, who turned a small tech startup into a global powerhouse, who never needed anyone's approval or support. The following morning, Victoria strode into the boardroom precisely 1 minute before the emergency session was scheduled to begin. Every member was already seated, a united front of expensive suits and wary expressions. Lawrence Bennett sat at the far end, his face a mask of righteous concern. "Let's make this quick," Victoria said, taking her seat at the head of the table. "I have actual business to conduct today." "This is actual business," Lawrence replied, his tone sanctimonious. "The board has concerns about your judgment regarding the restoration division and the hiring of Thomas Reeves." Victoria's expression remained impassive. "Noted. Is that all?" Lawrence exchanged glances with several board members. "We're invoking Section 7.3 of the company charter. Major organizational changes require board majority approval if they exceed certain financial thresholds. The restoration division qualifies." Victoria's pulse quickened, though nothing in her demeanor betrayed her anger. "The division was approved yesterday." "The concept was approved," Rebecca clarified, not meeting Victoria's eyes. The budget allocation and organizational structure require separate approval, which we are withholding," Lawrence continued, "pending a full review of the division's business case and leadership selection process." Victoria understood the strategy immediately. They couldn't stop her directly, but they could delay, question, and undermine until she either abandoned the project or removed Thomas from consideration. "I see," she said, her voice dangerously soft. "And the internship selection committee, has that also been subject to review?" Lawrence had the grace to look uncomfortable. "We've established an oversight panel to ensure all selections are made on merit alone." Victoria stood slowly, placing her palms flat on the table. "Let me be perfectly clear. You are overstepping. This company exists because of my vision, my work, and my sacrifice. If you insist on turning this into a power struggle, I promise you will not enjoy the outcome." "Is that a threat?" Lawrence asked, color rising to his jowls. "No, Lawrence," Victoria replied with glacial calm. "It's a forecast." She straightened, adjusting her blazer with precise movements. "The restoration division proceeds as planned. Thomas Reeves will complete the standard interview process. If he is the most qualified candidate, he will be hired. The internship selections will be made based on merit, as they always have been. If Sophie Reeves earns her place, she will receive it. And if we disagree?" Rebecca asked quietly. Victoria's hand rose unconsciously to the locket at her throat. "Then prepare for a very public, very ugly battle over the future of this company. But I will win." Without waiting for a response, she turned and left the boardroom, her heels clicking a staccato rhythm of barely contained fury. The technical interview was the hardest. Thomas sat across from 3 engineers who questioned every aspect of his knowledge on historical building techniques, structural integrity assessments, and modern compliance standards. The financial interview wasn't much better. Spreadsheets and projections, cost-benefit analyses, and return on investment calculations. Thomas struggled through with practical experience where his formal education lacked. The managerial interview, surprisingly, went smoothly. Thomas spoke honestly about his leadership philosophy from his years running construction crews. Direct communication, leading by example, understanding that every person on a site contributed to its success or failure. Now, 3 days after the board's emergency session, Thomas waited in the same interview room where he'd first met Johnson from HR. The door opened and Victoria entered alone, a folder in her hands. She looked tired, faint shadows visible beneath her expertly applied makeup. "Mr. Reeves," she said formally, taking the seat across from him. "Miss Harlow," he replied, matching her tone. She placed the folder on the table between them, her fingers lingering on its edge. "The interview committee has completed their assessment." Thomas nodded, bracing himself. He'd given his best, but knew his unconventional background worked against him in a corporate environment. "Your technical knowledge exceeded expectations," Victoria began, opening the folder. "Your financial acumen was adequate. Your leadership approach impressed the management team." She looked up at him. "Overall, you ranked second among the candidates." Thomas felt a complex mixture of disappointment and relief. Second meant he'd proven himself capable, but not enough to overcome the political complications his hiring would create. "I understand," he said quietly. "Thank you for the opportunity." "I haven't finished," Victoria said, her voice sharpening. "The first-ranked candidate declined the position this morning. Apparently, he received a more lucrative offer from our competitor." Thomas straightened in his chair. "And that means the position is yours, if you still want it." Victoria closed the folder. "You'll report directly to me until the division is established. Starting salary is $165,000 with full benefits, stock options, and performance bonuses." Thomas stared at her, momentarily speechless. The amount was more than 3 times what he'd ever earned in his best year. "That's generous," he managed finally. It's market rate for the position," Victoria corrected, her tone businesslike. "The restoration division's success depends on strong leadership. I expect results, Mr. Reeves. This isn't charity." "I never thought it was," Thomas replied, finding his footing. "When do I start?" "Monday, 9 a.m. Victoria stood, extending her hand. "Congratulations." Thomas rose and took her hand. Her grip was firm, professional, but he felt a slight tremor she couldn't quite control. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something passed between them. Recognition, perhaps, of the walls they'd both constructed around themselves for different reasons. "Thank you for believing in me," Thomas said softly. Victoria withdrew her hand quickly. "I believe in potential. Don't make me regret it." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "The internship selections are being announced this afternoon. For what it's worth, I recused myself from the final decision." Before Thomas could respond, she was gone, leaving him alone with life-changing news and the lingering scent of her perfume, something subtle and expensive that reminded him of winter evenings. Sophie's phone chimed just as her quantum mechanics lecture ended. She slipped into the hallway of the engineering building, heart pounding as she saw the sender, Harlow Industries Internship Committee. With trembling fingers, she opened the email. Her eyes scanned the first paragraph, then widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. Thomas was pulling into their apartment complex when his phone rang. Sophie's name flashed on the screen. "Dad!" she exclaimed before he could speak. "I got it. I got the internship." Thomas pulled into a parking space, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "That's incredible, honey. I'm so proud of you." "It says I ranked first among all applicants," Sophie continued, her voice breathless with excitement. "First, Dad, out of over 2,000 people." "Of course you did," Thomas said, emotion thickening his voice. "You're brilliant. And guess what else? They're assigning me to the Sustainable Energy Integration Team for the new Restoration Division. We'll be working in the same building." Thomas smiled. "Sounds like we both have good news. I got the job." Sophie's squeal of delight was so loud he had to hold the phone away from his ear. "This is the best day ever. We have to celebrate." Later that evening, as they shared a celebratory pizza at their small kitchen table, Sophie asked the question Thomas had been dreading. "Do you think Ms. Harlow influenced the decisions?" Thomas set down his slice. "She told me she recused herself from the internship selection." "And your job?" "I ranked second. The first choice candidate declined." Sophie studied him skeptically. "The convenient timing." "Sophie," Thomas said firmly, "I need to believe I earned this. You earned your spot fairly, on merit." Sophie nodded slowly. "Okay, I believe you." She took another bite of pizza, then asked, "Have you told her yet about Mom?" Thomas stiffened. "Why would I?" "Because it's part of who you are. Because you both lost people you love. Because—" "Sophie," Thomas interrupted gently, "Mrs. Harlow is my employer now. That's all. Sophie rolled her eyes. Dad, I saw how you looked at her, and I think it's okay, you know. Mum would want you to be happy. Thomas sighed, uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Let's focus on celebrating our achievement. Okay, fine, Sophie conceded. Mad, but this conversation isn't over. Across the city, Victoria sat alone in her penthouse office, a glass of wine untouched beside her as she reviewed the day's events. The board had been temporarily placated by the news that Thomas had legitimately ranked highly in the interview process. The first choice candidate's timely departure for a competitor had raised eyebrows but couldn't be questioned. She hadn't lied. Not technically. The other candidate had indeed received another offer. Victoria had simply ensured it was generous enough to be irresistible. Her phone chimed with a text from Rebecca. Lawrence is backing down for now, but this isn't over. Be careful. Victoria didn't respond. Instead, she opened her laptop and pulled up Sophie Reeves' internship application. The girl was undeniably brilliant. Her technical scores were flawless, her essays insightful and forward-thinking. She had indeed ranked first on merit alone. Victoria touched the locket at her throat, a habit she'd developed in recent weeks. What was she doing? Creating opportunities for deserving candidates, or manufacturing reasons to keep Thomas Reeves in her orbit? Both, if she was honest with herself. And honesty was a luxury Victoria rarely indulged in. Her intercom buzzed. Miss Harlow? Her security guard's voice came through. There's a Thomas Reeves in the lobby asking to see you. Victoria's pulse quickened. Send him up. 5 minutes later, there was a knock at her penthouse door. When she opened it, Thomas stood in the hallway, still in his interview suit, looking determined. Mr. Reeves, she said, surprised. Is everything all right? I needed to ask you something, he replied, face to face. Victoria stepped aside to let him enter. Of course. Thomas walked to the center of her living room, then turned to face her. Did you manipulate the hiring process? For me or for Sophie? Victoria's expression remained neutral. Sophie earned her place entirely on merit. And me? Victoria hesitated. The first choice candidate did receive another offer. That you arranged, Thomas finished for her. Victoria didn't deny it. You were qualified, second out of 17 candidates, but not first, Thomas said quietly. No, Victoria admitted, not first. Thomas nodded slowly, processing this. Why? Why go to such lengths? Victoria turned away, moving to the window that overlooked her city. I don't know, she admitted, her voice barely audible. I think you do, Thomas said, stepping closer. I think finding that locket woke something in you that you've kept buried for 20 years. Victoria's reflection in the glass showed a flash of vulnerability before her walls slammed back into place. That's presumptuous, Mr. Reeves. It's honest, Thomas countered. And I'd appreciate the same from you. Victoria turned from the window to face Thomas. In her penthouse, with the city lights spread beneath them like scattered stars, they stood at a crossroads, no longer simply janitor and CEO, not quite friends, certainly not colleagues yet. Honesty, she repeated, as if testing the word. An interesting request from someone who initially approached me under false pretenses. Thomas frowned. Or what do you mean? Victoria moved to her desk and retrieved a tablet. A few taps brought up a security camera feed. Thomas in the executive storage room on level 40, carefully examining the wall panel, then retrieving something from his pocket and placing it behind the broken section. You didn't find the locket in that wall, Victoria said quietly. You put it there. Thomas stared at the footage, his expression unreadable. And how long have you known? Since the beginning. I have cameras everywhere in my buildings, Mr. Reeves. It's one of the first things I checked after you returned the lost locket. Then why? Thomas asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Why the job? The internship interview for Sophie? Why any of it if you knew I lied? Victoria set the tablet down and moved to a sideboard where she poured herself a glass of water, buying time to organize her thoughts. Because the locket is real, she said finally. It was my mother's, then mine. It did contain photos of my family, and it was lost the night of the groundbreaking ceremony for this tower. She turned to face him. What I don't understand is how you got it. Thomas sank onto the edge of a chair, his carefully constructed narrative crumbling. My father worked security at the old building site. The night of the groundbreaking, he found it in the parking lot. He tried to turn it in, but with all the chaos of the event, no one paid attention. He kept it, intending to find the owner. Victoria's fingers went to her throat where the locket now rested, but he never did. He died 3 months later. Heart attack. The locket ended up in a box of his effects that I never fully sorted through. Thomas looked up at her. When Sophie got sick and needed specialized treatment we couldn't afford, I started researching obscure medical scholarship. That's when I came across an old newspaper article about Victoria Harlow offering a reward for a family heirloom, a silver locket lost 20 years ago. Victoria's expression remained carefully neutral. So you manufactured a discovery to claim the reward. I needed the money for Sophie's treatments, Thomas admitted. But when I actually opened the locket and saw the photos inside, he hesitated. They reminded me of my own family photos, the ones I keep of my wife. I couldn't just sell it back to you like a transaction. It felt wrong. So you created an elaborate story about finding it behind a wall panel, Victoria concluded, and rejected the reward money in favor of asking for an opportunity for your daughter instead. Thomas nodded, shame evident in his slumped shoulders. I never expected any of this to happen. The job offer, getting to know you. I just wanted Sophie to have a chance. Victoria studied him, her analytical mind processing this new information against everything she'd observed about Thomas Reeves. The truth was messier than his original story, but paradoxically made him more human, not less. Why are you telling me this now? She asked. Because you asked for honesty, Thomas replied simply. And because I can't accept the position knowing it was built on a lie. I'll resign before I've even started. Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then, to Thomas's surprise, she laughed, a short, sharp sound like glass breaking. Mr. Reeves, do you know how I built Harlow Industries? She asked, moving to sit across from him. With half-truth, strategic omissions, and calculated risk, the business world doesn't reward honesty. It rewards results. That sounds lonely, Thomas observed quietly. Victoria's laugh died abruptly. Excuse me, living that way, always calculating, never trusting. It sounds lonely. No one had spoken to Victoria this directly in years. Her employees feared her. Her board respected, but resented her. Her social circle consisted of strategic alliances rather than friendships. No one saw past Victoria Harlow, CEO, to the woman who still visited her family's graves every week. It's efficient, she countered, but her voice lacked conviction. Is it? Thomas leaned forward. You've built an empire, but who do you share it with? Who knows the woman behind the title? Victoria's composure slipped just for a moment. That's irrelevant to this discussion. Is it? Thomas repeated her words back to her. You manipulated the hiring process to keep me around. You wear a locket with family photos every day for 20 years. You visit their graves weekly. The restoration division itself is about preserving things of value from the past rather than always building new. He paused. Victoria, when was the last time you let anyone see who you really are? The use of her first name, intimate, presumptuous, should have angered her. Instead, it pierced through layers of carefully constructed defenses. You should go, she said, standing abruptly. This conversation is inappropriate. Thomas rose as well. You're right. I overstepped. I apologize. He moved toward the door, then stopped. For what it's worth, I think we're more alike than either of us want to admit. We both built walls to protect what matters most. Victoria remained silent, her expression unreadable. I'll submit my resignation in the morning, Thomas said quietly. Sophie can decline the internship if that's best. No, Victoria said sharply. Sophie earned her place. Her accomplishments stand on their own merits. And me, Victoria hesitated. The first candidate truly did receive another offer. Your second place ranking was legitimate. Your qualifications are real, regardless of how we initially connected. She met his gaze directly. The job is still yours, if you want it. Thomas studied her face, trying to understand this complex woman who could be simultaneously ruthless and compassionate. Why? Victoria touched the locket at her throat, a gesture that had become almost unconscious. Because you were right about all of it. And because I think you'll do exceptional work with the restoration division. Is that the only reason? The question hung between them, dangerous in its simplicity. Monday, 9 a.m., Mr. Reeves, Victoria said, her professional mask sliding back into place. Don't be late for your first day. Thomas recognized the dismissal, but stood his ground. You never answered my question. Which one? When was the last time you let anyone see who you really are? Victoria's eyes met his, and for the briefest moment, Thomas glimpsed the woman behind the armor, vulnerable, lonely, and terrified of the connection forming between them. 20 years ago, she whispered. The night I lost my locket. Thomas nodded, understanding the magnitude of what she'd just admitted. Thank you for your honesty. As he left the penthouse, Victoria remained standing in the center of her immaculate living room, surrounded by the trappings of success and utterly alone, with the realization that a maintenance worker had seen through her more clearly than anyone had in decades. Monday morning arrived with the fanfare that accompanied all major Harlow Industries initiative. The official launch of the Historical Restoration Division made the financial news, with analysts debating the strategic wisdom of the diversification. Victoria had scheduled a press conference for 9:30, followed by a tour of the future headquarters on the 65th floor for select media. At precisely 8:55 a.m., Thomas stepped off the executive elevator, no longer in maintenance coveralls, but in a new charcoal suit. Marcus was waiting for him. "Mr. Reeves," he greeted with professional courtesy. "Your office is this way." Thomas followed him down a corridor of glass and steel to a corner office with sweeping city views. His name was already on the door. Thomas Reeves, Director, Historical Restoration Division. "Ms. Harlow asked me to give you these," Marcus said, handing over a folder. "The press conference begins in 30 minutes. She'll meet you on the 65th floor at 9:20. Left alone in his new office, Thomas opened the folder to find architectural plans for the 65th floor, detailed renderings that incorporated every idea he'd mentioned during their first visit to the space. Exposed structural elements, reclaimed materials, a seamless blend of historical craftsmanship and modern function. At the bottom of the last page was a handwritten note in elegant script. "I'm trying to be more honest. V." The press conference unfolded with Victoria's characteristic precision. She stood at the podium, elegant in a tailored navy suit, the silver locket gleaming at her throat, as she outlined the vision for the Historical Restoration Division. "In a world obsessed with the new, we often forget the value of what came before," she told the assembled reporters. "Harlow Industries has always been at the forefront of innovation. Today, we innovate by looking backward, preserving architectural heritage while integrating sustainable technology for the future." Thomas stood slightly behind her, conscious of the cameras and the curious glances from the press. When Victoria introduced him as the division's director, he stepped forward with a confidence that surprised even himself. "Our first project," he announced, "will be the Westbrook Library, a century-old architectural landmark facing demolition. We'll preserve its neo-Gothic facade and historical elements while transforming the interior into a modern community space with zero carbon footprint." The questions flew fast. Why this strategic shift? What were the projected returns? How did the new director, notably not from the corporate world, plan to execute such ambitious projects? Thomas answered each one thoughtfully, drawing on decades of practical experience rather than rehearsed corporate speak. When one reporter asked pointedly about his unusual background, Victoria smoothly intervened. "Harlow Industries values expertise over convention," she stated firmly. "Mr. Reeves brings unparalleled practical knowledge of historical construction techniques. Sometimes the most valuable perspectives come from outside traditional channels." The subtle defensiveness in her tone wasn't lost on Thomas. After the press conference, as they rode the elevator to the 65th floor for the media tour, he finally spoke. "Thank you for that." Victoria glanced at him. "For what?" "Defending my appointment. You didn't have to." "I never do anything I don't have to do, Mr. Reeves," she replied, though the slight curve of her lips softened the words. The elevator doors opened to reveal the 65th floor, where construction had already begun based on Thomas's designs. Several journalists waited with cameras and recording devices, eager to document the physical manifestation of Harlow Industries' new direction. As Thomas led the tour, explaining how original structural elements would be exposed and integrated with sustainable materials, he noticed Victoria watching him, not with her usual critical assessment, but with something that looked almost like pride. Later, after the media had departed, they stood alone in what would become the division's main workspace, surrounded by the bones of Thomas's vision slowly taking physical form. They were impressed, Victoria noted, running her fingers along an exposed steel beam that would remain a feature element. Particularly with you. I just spoke the truth, Thomas shrugged. Buildings have stories. We're preserving them, not just the structures. Victoria studied him for a moment. You truly believe in this, don't you? It's not just a job to you. I've spent years taking things apart, Thomas replied. It feels good to preserve something for once. Victoria nodded, understanding more than he realized. She'd built her empire by dismantling competitors, by always looking forward to the next acquisition, the next expansion. The restoration division represented something different, not just professionally, but personally. The Westbrook Library project, she said. It's ambitious for a first undertaking. Too ambitious. No, Victoria smiled slightly. Ambitious is what Harlow Industries does best. I've scheduled a site visit for tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. I'll be ready, Thomas assured her. Good, Victoria hesitated, then added, Sophie begins her internship tomorrow as well. Her supervisor tells me she's been assigned to the energy integration team for Westbrook. Thomas smiled. She's been researching historical electrical systems all weekend. I don't think she's slept. Something like wistfulness crossed Victoria's features. She reminds me of myself at that age. Determined, brilliant, with better support, Thomas said quietly. She has me. You had no one after your family. He trailed off, realizing he'd ventured into dangerous territory. Victoria's past was clearly a closely guarded sanctuary. To his surprise, Victoria didn't shut down the conversation. I had their memory, she said, her fingers rising to touch the locket. It was enough. Was it? The simple question hung between them, unanswered as Victoria checked her watch. I have a board meeting in 20 minutes. We'll continue this discussion another time, Mr. Reeves. Thomas watched her leave, recognizing the retreat for what it was. Not rejection, but self-preservation. The next morning, Thomas and Sophie arrived at Harlow Tower together, both dressed for their respective roles. Thomas in a crisp button-down and khakis appropriate for a construction site visit, Sophie in business casual for her first day as an intern. Nervous? Thomas asked as they rode the elevator. Sophie exhaled sharply. Terrified. Excited. Mostly terrified. You earned this, Thomas reminded her. You belong here, says the man who's somehow become Victoria Harlow's personal project director. Sophie teased, nudging his shoulder. Thomas frowned. That's not what this is, Dad. Sophie sighed. I've seen how she looks at you, and how you look at her. It's been 6 years since Mom died. It's okay to have feelings again. Before Thomas could respond, the elevator doors opened, and Sophie stepped out on the R&D floor where the interns were gathering. Good luck on your site visit, she called over her shoulder. Try not to fall in love with your boss. Thomas shook his head, smiling despite himself as the doors closed. His daughter's perceptiveness was both a blessing and a curse. The elevator continued upward to the executive floor, where Victoria waited in the lobby, reviewing documents on her tablet. She looked up as he approached, and Thomas was struck again by the dichotomy she presented. Razor-sharp business acumen, wrapped in elegant femininity, vulnerability hidden beneath layers of corporate armor. Good morning, Mr. Reeves, she greeted him. Ready to see our first project site? Absolutely, he nodded. And please, if we're going to work closely together, Thomas is fine. Victoria considered this, then gave a slight nod. Thomas, then, and Victoria. When we're not in formal settings, it was a small concession, but Thomas recognized it for the significant step it represented. The Westbrook Library stood as a dignified reminder of another era. Gothic arches, intricate stonework, and delicate stained glass windows that had witnessed over a century of the city's evolution. Now it sat empty, its future uncertain, until Harlow Industries had purchased it from the city for a nominal fee with the promise of preservation. As they walked through the grand reading room, their footsteps echoing on the marble floor, Thomas watched Victoria's expression soften. Here, away from boardrooms and press conferences, surrounded by history and craftsmanship, she seemed to shed some of her guardedness. My father used to bring me here on Sundays, she said unexpectedly. running her hand along a carved wooden banister. We'd spend hours in the astronomy section. He taught me about constellations before I could even read. Thomas remained quiet, sensing the rarity of this voluntary glimpse into her past. This place matters to people, Victoria continued, not just as architecture, but as memory. That's what I couldn't make the board understand. It's hard to quantify the value of memory, Thomas observed, but impossible to replace once it's gone. Victoria's eyes met his, a moment of perfect understanding passing between them. Exactly. They continued their tour, discussing structural challenges and preservation priorities, the conversation flowing between professional assessment and personal connection with seamless ease. For the first time, Thomas felt they were truly collaborating as equals, each bringing different but complementary expertise to the project. As they examined the library's central dome, Victoria's phone rang. Her expression darkened as she checked the screen. "I need to take this," she said, stepping away. Thomas could hear only her side of the conversation, but her increasingly tense tone told him something was wrong. When she returned, her professional mask was firmly back in place. "We need to return to the office immediately," she stated. "The board has called another emergency session." The emergency board meeting had already begun when Victoria entered the conference room, Thomas following a step behind. Lawrence Bennett stood at the head of the table, a projection screen behind him, displaying what appeared to be security footage. "Ah, Victoria," Lawrence said with manufactured pleasantness. "And Mr. Reeves, how convenient that you're already together." Victoria took her seat at the opposite end of the table, her expression revealing nothing. "What's the meaning of this, Lawrence? We were conducting an important site assessment." "I'm sure you were," Lawrence replied, his tone insinuating something entirely different. "The board has some concerns we feel must be addressed immediately." Thomas remained standing near the door, uncertain of his place in this corporate theater. "Mr. Reeves," Rebecca called from her seat, "please join us. This concerns you as well." Victoria's eyes flashed a warning, but Thomas took a seat at the far end of the table, as distant from her as the space allowed. Lawrence cleared his throat. For the past month, this board has expressed concerns about potential conflicts of interest regarding the Restoration Division and its leadership. Today, those concerns have been substantiated." He clicked a remote, and the screen changed to show Victoria and Thomas at the Westbrook Library, standing close, Victoria touching the locket at her throat, an unmistakable intimacy in their body language. "These were taken this morning by the project documentation team," Lawrence continued. "They're rather telling. Wouldn't you agree?" Victoria's jaw tightened. "If you're suggesting that a professional site visit constitutes impropriety." "Not just this morning," Lawrence interrupted, clicking to the next image. Victoria and Thomas in her penthouse the night he'd confronted her about the locket. Or this, another click, the two of them at her family's graves. "Our concern isn't merely professional, Victoria. It's about judgment, stability, the future of this company." Thomas felt cold anger building in his chest. They'd been watching them, documenting private moments, creating a narrative of impropriety where none existed, at least not in action, whatever complicated feelings might be developing. "I fail to see how my personal life impacts Harlow Industries," Victoria stated coldly. "When you create an entire division to keep a man close to you, when you manipulate hiring processes, when you risk our reputation on someone with no corporate experience." Lawrence's voice rose with each question. "It absolutely impacts this company." Rebecca leaned forward. "Victoria, we're concerned. This isn't like you. Making major business decisions based on personal feelings." "I've made no such decisions," Victoria cut in, her voice deadly quiet. "The Restoration Division is profitable, forward-thinking, and aligns perfectly with our sustainability initiatives. Mr. Reeves was qualified for his position. Every decision I've made has been in the best interest of this company." "Then explain these," Lawrence demanded, clicking through more surveillance photos, Victoria touching the locket while looking at Thomas, their hands briefly meeting over blueprints, a dozen small moments of connection captured and stripped of context. Thomas had heard enough. He stood abruptly. "This is inappropriate. You've been spying on Ms. Harlow and manufacturing evidence of something that doesn't exist. I'm a division director doing my job, nothing more." "Sit down, Mr. Reeves," Lawrence ordered, You're not in a position to— No, Lawrence, Victoria interrupted, rising as well. Mr. Reeves is right. This is inappropriate, intrusive, and borders on illegal surveillance. If you have concerns about my leadership, address them directly, not with this tabloid approach. Lawrence's face reddened. We're invoking Section 12 of the company charter, a vote of no confidence in your leadership. The room fell silent. Section 12 was the nuclear option, a provision that could remove Victoria as CEO if 2/3 of the board agreed. Victoria's composure never wavered. You need 16 votes. You don't have them. We have 14, Lawrence counted, and 2 members who are on the fence. The vote is scheduled for Friday. Victoria's eyes swept the room, assessing allies and enemies with cold precision. Then I suggest you all return to your offices and consider very carefully whether you want to be on the right or wrong side of what happens next. She turned and walked out, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Thomas followed, closing the door behind them. In the privacy of Victoria's office, her calm facade finally cracked. She paced furiously, her hands clenched into fists. They've been planning this for weeks, she seethed, using you as an excuse to orchestrate a takeover. I'm sorry, Thomas said quietly. This is my fault. Victoria stopped pacing. No. This is corporate politics at its ugliest. Lawrence has wanted me out for years. You're just a convenient catalyst. Still, I should resign, remove their ammunition. Absolutely not, Victoria said firmly. That's exactly what they want. If you resign, it validates their accusations. Makes it look like we had something to hide. Thomas ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. Then what do we do? Victoria's expression hardened with resolve. We fight. I didn't build this company from nothing, to have it taken from me by small-minded men who mistake kindness for weakness. And us? Thomas asked carefully. Whatever this is between us. Victoria's hand went automatically to the locket. There is no us, Thomas. Not in the way they're suggesting. There can't be. The words struck with surgical precision, cutting through unspoken possibilities that had been growing between them. Yet even as she said it, Victoria's fingers remained on the locket, the tell Thomas had come to recognize as her connection to deeper truths she couldn't express. I understand, he said, though his eyes conveyed something different. Professionally, what's our next move? Victoria seemed to appreciate his pivot to practical matters. We accelerate the Westbrook project, demonstrate the division's value beyond question. I'll handle the board, Thomas nodded, accepting the path forward even as something twisted painfully in his chest. I should check on Sophie. Make sure she's not caught in the crossfire of all this. Yes, Victoria agreed. The interns should be insulated from board politics. As Thomas reached the door, Victoria called after him softly, Thomas, I meant what I said. None of this is your fault. He offered a sad smile in return. Sometimes fault isn't what matters. It's finding a way forward that does the least harm. After Thomas left, Victoria sank into her chair, the weight of the coming battle settling on her shoulders. The locket felt suddenly heavy against her skin, a reminder of what she'd lost once, and what she stood to lose again if she allowed herself to care too deeply. Her intercom buzzed. Ms. Harlow? Marcus's voice came through. Sophie Reeves is asking to see you. She says it's urgent. Victoria frowned. Send her in. Sophie entered moments later, her face flushed with emotion. Miss Harlow, I just heard. The other interns are talking about it, saying my dad is only here because of some personal relationship with you, that I only got my spot because of it. Victoria's expression softened. Office gossip travels far. Is it true? Sophie demanded. Are they trying to force you out because of my dad? It's complicated, Victoria answered carefully. But no, not exactly. This is about power, not your father. Sophie paced, a mirror of Victoria's earlier movement. This is so unfair. Dad's worked his whole life for an opportunity like this. He deserves it. And now they're using him to hurt you. Victoria was struck by the young woman's fierce loyalty, so reminiscent of her own determination at that age. Sophie, she said gently, your father is more than capable of weathering this storm. As am I. Your only concern should be excelling in your internship. Sophie stopped pacing, fixing Victoria with a penetrating gaze too mature for her 19 years. Can I ask you something personal? Victoria hesitated, then nodded. "The locket my dad found. What's in it?" The question wasn't what Victoria expected. "Photos of my family. And you wear it every day, even though it reminds you of loss." Victoria's hand rose unconsciously to touch it. "Perhaps because it reminds me." Sophie nodded, as if confirming something to herself. "That's what I thought. My dad keeps Mum's wedding ring in his wallet, never takes it out, but always knows it's there." She moved toward the door, then turned back. "He deserves to be happy again. So do you." Before Victoria could respond, Sophie was gone, leaving her alone with thoughts more turbulent than any boardroom battle could create. The days leading up to Friday's vote became a carefully choreographed battle of corporate strategy. Victoria moved through Harlow Tower like a general positioning troops, holding private meetings with board members, reminding some of past favors, subtly threatening others with the consequences of betrayal. She was in her element, calculating, precise, and utterly ruthless when necessary. Thomas, meanwhile, threw himself into the Westbrook Library project with singular focus. He assembled a team of the company's best engineers and designers, working 18-hour days to accelerate the timeline. If the restoration division needed to prove its worth, he would ensure it did so spectacularly. Sophie observed it all with the keen insight of someone both insider and outsider. She excelled in her internship, impressing her supervisors with innovative approaches to energy storage solutions for the Westbrook project. Yet she also witnessed the strain on her father, the dark circles under his eyes deepening as Friday approached. "Dad, you need to rest," she insisted on Wednesday evening when she found him still at his desk at 9 o'clock, surrounded by structural assessments and material specifications. Thomas looked up, blinking as if emerging from a trance. "Just a few more calculations. These load-bearing walls will still be there tomorrow," Sophie finished, gently closing his laptop. "This isn't just about the project, is it? It's about her," Thomas sighed, too exhausted to maintain pretenses. "It's about doing right by someone who took a chance on me. On us," Sophie corrected. "And I think it's more than that." Before Thomas could respond, his phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. "My office. 30 minutes. Important development." 28 minutes later, Thomas stepped off the elevator onto the executive floor. The space was deserted at this hour, most employees long gone. Victoria's office door stood ajar, a slice of warm light spilling into the darkened hallway. He found her standing by the window, silhouetted against the city lights, the silver locket clasped in her palm rather than hanging at her throat. "You wanted to see me," Thomas said, remaining near the doorway. Victoria turned, and he was struck by how tired she looked, not physically, but a bone-deep weariness that even her impeccable composure couldn't fully conceal. "Lawrence has secured 15 votes, she said without preamble. "He needs 16 to remove me." Thomas absorbed this. "Who's the 16th? "Rebecca Winters, my CFO, once my friend." Victoria's laugh held no humor. "She's meeting Lawrence for dinner tonight to finalize her decision. Can't you speak with her? Remind her of your history together." Victoria replaced the locket around her neck, her armor back in position. "Rebecca made her position clear this afternoon. She believes my judgment has been compromised by you." The accusation hung in the air between them. Thomas took a step forward, then stopped himself. "I should resign tonight. End this." "No," Victoria said sharply. "That's exactly what Lawrence wants, to show I can be manipulated through personal connections." She moved to her desk, retrieving a folder. "I've been preparing for this possibility. The Westbrook project presentation is scheduled for tomorrow morning. Every board member will attend." Thomas frowned. "The presentation isn't ready. We're still finalizing the sustainability metrics and cost projections." "They will be ready," Victoria stated, her tone allowing no argument. "This is our counterattack, Thomas. We demonstrate the Restoration Division's value so conclusively that voting against me becomes voting against the company's best interests. And if it's not enough," Victoria's eyes met his, steel and vulnerability in equal measure, "and then I lose the company I've spent 20 years building, but I won't go down without a fight." Thomas recognized the determination in her expression, the same fierce resolve he'd seen when she protected her brother's memory, when she defended his hiring to the board, when she refused to let her grief define her. "We'll be ready," he promised. "The team will work through the night if necessary." Victoria nodded, a silent acknowledgement of his loyalty. "There's something else you should know." She hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. Lawrence offered a compromise. "If I agree to dissolve the restoration division and distance myself from you and Sophie, he'll withdraw the vote of no confidence." Thomas felt the impact of her words like a physical blow. "What did you tell him?" "I told him to go to hell," Victoria replied, a flash of her old fire returning. "I don't sacrifice people She stopped abruptly. "People you what?" Thomas asked quietly. Victoria turned away. "People I respect." The word choice was deliberate, professional, safe. Thomas recognized the retreat into formality for what it was. Self-preservation in the face of feelings too complicated to acknowledge. "I should get back to work," he said finally. "We have a presentation to perfect." As he reached the door, Victoria called after him, "Thomas, thank you for everything." The simple words carried a weight that made him pause. "You're welcome, Victoria." Through the night, Thomas's team worked feverishly on the Westbrook presentation. Sophie stayed, coordinating with the energy integration team to finalize their sustainable technology solution. By dawn, they had created something remarkable, not just a renovation plan, but a vision for historical preservation that honored the past while embracing the future. At 8:45 a.m., Thomas sent the completed presentation to Victoria with a simple message: ready. The board meeting began at 9 a.m. sharp. Victoria sat at the head of the table, composed and regal, despite the executioner's axe hanging over her. Lawrence occupied the opposite end, barely concealing his anticipation of victory. The remaining board members arranged themselves according to allegiance, with Rebecca seated squarely in the middle, the swing vote whose decision would determine everything. "Before we proceed to the vote of no confidence," Victoria began, her voice steady, "I've requested time for a presentation on the Westbrook Library project, the first undertaking of our historical restoration division." Lawrence frowned. "This is procedurally irregular. The vote was the only agenda item. The charter allows the CEO to present material relevant to company interests before any major board decision," Victoria countered. "Unless you're afraid what you'll hear might change some minds." The challenge was impossible to refuse without appearing fearful. Lawrence nodded tersely. "Proceed, but make it quick." Victoria gestured to Marcus, who opened the door. Thomas entered, followed by Sophie and two other members of the project team. Thomas nodded professionally to the board, careful to maintain appropriate distance from Victoria, though their eyes met briefly in silent communication. "Good morning," Thomas began. "The Westbrook Library project represents more than a building renovation. It's a new direction for Harlow Industries, one that combines respect for our architectural heritage with cutting-edge sustainable technology." As he launched into the presentation, the initial skepticism on many board members' faces gradually transformed into genuine interest. Thomas spoke with authority and passion, explaining how the restoration would reduce carbon footprint by 60% compared to new construction, while creating a community landmark that honored the city's history. Sophie presented the energy integration components, her brilliant technical mind shining as she detailed innovations that would make Westbrook a net-zero energy building. The other team members covered financial projections showing a 15% return on investment within 5 years, significantly higher than industry standards for similar projects. Thomas concluded by revealing architectural renderings of the restored library, its historic facade preserved while the interior transformed into a breathtaking blend of old and new. "This isn't just a building," he said, his voice resonating with conviction. "It's a testament to what matters, honoring our past while building our future." As the presentation ended, the room fell silent. Lawrence looked distinctly uncomfortable. Several board members were nodding appreciatively. Rebecca's expression remained unreadable. Victoria rose smoothly. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves. The board will now deliberate privately." Thomas and his team filed out, leaving Victoria alone with the people who would decide her fate. As the door closed behind them, Thomas caught one last glimpse of Victoria, standing tall, her hand resting on the silver locket at her throat, ready to fight for everything she'd built. Thomas paced the hallway outside the boardroom, checking his watch every few minutes. The presentation had ended 45 minutes ago, and still no word from inside. Sophie sat nearby, her laptop open but untouched, her attention fixed on her father's restless movement. "Dad, wearing a hole in the carpet won't make them decide faster," she said gently. Thomas managed a weak smile. "I know, I just care about her," Sophie finished. "It's okay to admit it." Before Thomas could respond, the boardroom door opened. Marcus emerged, his expression carefully neutral. "Mr. Reeves, Ms. Harlow would like to see you. Alone." Thomas glanced at Sophie, who gave him an encouraging nod. "Go. I'll wait." The boardroom was eerily silent as Thomas entered. Most of the chairs were empty, papers and coffee cups the only evidence of the battle that had unfolded. Victoria stood alone by the window, her back to him, silhouetted against the morning sun. "Victoria," he said quietly. She turned, and Thomas saw immediately that something had changed. The rigid posture, the impenetrable mask she wore like armor, both had softened into something more human, more vulnerable. 15-7, she said simply. Thomas stepped closer, meaning Lawrence failed. The vote of no confidence didn't pass. A small smile touched her lips. Rebecca abstained, said she couldn't in good conscience vote against a project with such clear merit and vision. Relief flooded through Thomas. That's wonderful news. Yes, Victoria agreed, though her expression remained contemplative. But it came with a realization I wasn't prepared for. "What's that?" Victoria moved to the table, picking up a document bearing the Harlow Industries logo. "For 20 years, I've measured my worth by this company's success. Every acquisition, every expansion, every victory in the boardroom, it was all to prove something. To myself, to my family's memory." She met his gaze directly. "Today, I realized I was willing to risk losing it all rather than compromise on someone I believe in." The admission hung in the air between them, fragile and significant. "The restoration division continues," Victoria continued, her professional tone returning. "The board unanimously approved the Westbrook project budget. Your team's work was exceptional." "Our team," Thomas corrected, "including Sophie." Victoria nodded. "She has a remarkable mind. The internship committee is recommending her for a permanent position after graduation." Thomas felt pride swell in his chest. "She'll be thrilled." A silence fell between them, filled with unspoken possibilities. Victoria's hand rose to the locket at her throat, a gesture Thomas now recognized as her connection to deeper truths. "Lawrence resigned," she said finally, effective immediately. "The board has asked me to restructure senior leadership, starting with a new COO." Thomas nodded, unsure where this was leading. "I'd like you to consider the position," Victoria said. "Your vision for the restoration division, your leadership, they're exactly what Harlow Industries needs." Thomas blinked in surprise. "I'm not qualified. I don't have the corporate experience." "Experience can be gained," Victoria interrupted. "Integrity, vision, the ability to see value in what others dismiss, those can't be taught." She stepped closer. "Think about it. That's all I ask." Thomas studied her face, seeing beyond the CEO to the woman who had begun to emerge in recent weeks. "Is that the only reason you want me to stay? Professional considerations?" Victoria's composure wavered. Her fingers tightened around the locket. "You should know, the board had conditions for their support. One was a clear delineation between our professional and personal relationships." "I see," Thomas said quietly, understanding the implicit boundary being drawn. "And you agreed?" "I told them our professional relationship would remain exactly that, professional." Victoria took a deep breath. "What happens outside these walls is not their concern." Thomas's heart quickened at the implication. "And what do you want to happen outside these walls?" Victoria unclasped the locket from around her neck, holding it in her palm, the small silver oval that had brought them together. "For 20 years I've lived in the past, carrying my grief like a shield." She opened the locket, revealing the tiny photographs inside. "They were everything to me. When I lost them, and this, I convinced myself I needed nothing and no one else." Thomas remained silent, understanding the magnitude of what she was sharing. "Finding this again," Victoria continued, her voice softening. "Finding you. It made me realize something I've been afraid to acknowledge. The past doesn't have to be all I have." She held the locket out to him, her hand trembling slightly. "I'd like you to keep this for me." Thomas stared at the offered locket in confusion. "Victoria, I don't understand. This is your most precious possession." "Exactly," she whispered, "and I'm trusting you with it. Not forever, just for tonight." Her eyes met his, vulnerability and hope mingling in their depths. "Have dinner with me, not as my division director, not in my penthouse with professional pretenses, just dinner. Two people getting to know each other beyond titles and tragedies." Thomas gently closed her fingers back around the locket. "You don't need to give me your past to share your future," he said softly. "Keep it close. It's part of who you are." His hand remained over hers. "And yes, I'd like to have dinner with you." The boardroom door opened, and Sophie peered in cautiously. Seeing their joined hands, she broke into a radiant smile. "I'm guessing we won." Victoria quickly regained her professional demeanor, though her eyes remained softer than before. "The restoration division stands. Your father has been offered a promotion, and your internship committee has recommended you for a permanent position after graduation." Sophie bounced on her toes with barely contained excitement. "This calls for a celebration. Dad, we should take Miss Harlow to Giovanni's tonight. Their tiramisu is amazing." Thomas looked to Victoria with an apologetic smile. "My daughter, the subtle wingman." To their surprise, Victoria laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed her face. "Giovanni's sounds perfect." 7 o'clock. Later that evening, as Thomas changed for dinner, he found himself staring at his reflection with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. The man in the mirror looked different from the maintenance worker who had staged a discovery just 2 months ago. There was purpose in his eyes, confidence in his posture. His phone chimed with a text from Sophie. "Meeting you there, taking a lift with friends. Don't wait up." Thomas shook his head, smiling at his daughter's transparent attempt to give him privacy. Another text arrived. This one from Victoria, running 10 minutes late. Traffic. He arrived at Giovanni's exactly on time, requesting a quiet table for 3 while wondering if Sophie would actually appear. At 7:15, Victoria walked in, and conversation around them momentarily faltered. She'd exchanged her business suit for a simple black dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. The silver locket gleamed at her throat, but something about her seemed lighter, as if a weight had been lifted. As she approached their table, Thomas rose to greet her. "You look beautiful," he said simply. Victoria smiled, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "Thank you." She glanced around. "Sophie, apparently meeting us here," Thomas replied, showing her the text. "Though I suspect we've been set up." Victoria laughed again. That same unguarded sound from earlier. "Your daughter is formidable. She'll go far at Harlow Industries." As they settled into conversation, the artificial distance between them dissolved. They spoke of childhood memories, dreams deferred, books they loved, places they hoped to see. For the first time, they were simply Victoria and Thomas, not CEO and employee, not billionaire and janitor, just two people discovering the joy of connection after years of loss. And on the table between them, catching the warm glow of candlelight, the silver locket rested, no longer merely a relic of the past, but a bridge to a future neither had dared to imagine.